Welcome back to Renewable Rides. Our guest today has done something remarkable. He traced the most extraordinary cost decline of nearly any technology. Greg Nemet is a professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison's La Follette School of Public Affairs, where he holds the Salzwedel Distinguished Faculty Chair in Business and Regulation. He is the author of How Solar Energy Became Cheap, now in its second edition, which examines how solar photovoltaic costs fell by a factor of more than 10,000, and what that means for how we power the world going forward. Greg is also a coordinating lead author for the IPCC's 7th Assessment Report, and a lead author on the landmark State of Carbon Dioxide Removal Report. If you want to understand why solar is now the cheapest source of electricity in history, how batteries are following a similar yet faster trajectory, and what it means for your business today, listen in to our conversation with Greg.
Greg, you touched on this briefly before in terms of as we produce more of this tech, the price point comes down and the technology gets better. Dan and I just did a podcast episode recently looking at the cost of inaction, and a lot of the pushback we get from people thinking about this is, should I wait because the technology is always improving? But our assessment showed that the cost of waiting and the impacts of rising utility rates far outdid now some of the cost or innovation benefits. But do you foresee any kind of big step changes in that, or is it now going to be, from a solar battery perspective, is it going to be incremental progress?
Incremental progress, that's what it's been, and I expect that will continue, but still progress. And I think that's the important thing, that both solar and batteries are coming down in cost, and it is along this learning curve, as you say, and the battery one is even a bit faster than the solar one, and that's leading to really rapid adoption. And we're seeing adoption of electric vehicles faster than almost anything that, like, there's a database a student and I put together of like 200 technologies, and batteries are really close to the top. And so, that dynamic of building more and the costs come down has been really important. And that's an interesting analysis that you mentioned too about, are there benefits to waiting? And you might say that there are, but if your alternative is increasing in costs like electricity rates and natural gas is, then the benefits to waiting are probably small and maybe none.
Yeah, certainly. And something that comes into the calculus of the business case for these. But maybe like when you came out with your second edition of your book recently, you described the solar-centric economy. What does that mean, and how should business leaders be making decisions around energy today and moving forward versus the environment that we were all living in just 5 years ago?
Yeah, I think that's just something that snuck up on me when I had a publisher approach me and said, would you do a second edition of the book? And my first reaction is like, I'd like to do something different because I enjoy like learning new things. But as I looked into solar, I was like, oh, wow, things have like moved a lot since the first edition. Like the cost had come down by 75%. The adoption was going up really quickly. And then crucially, new countries were starting to adopt solar. And that I thought was really interesting. So as I looked into it and just looking at the growth, solar has been growing at 30% a year for almost 40 years. And as I was looking at the drivers of why solar has grown so fast, it looks likely to continue that way. Like none of those drivers are going away, and some of them seem to be getting new life, like the cost of fossil fuels, for example. And so you don't need to grow at 30% a year globally for too much longer until solar becomes the number one source of energy. And it looks like, it could be on the order of 10 to 15 years if we're at the current growth rates. If growth rates crash to half of what they've been for the last 30 or 40 years, then we still have solar become the biggest technology, but it takes 15 to 20 years. And so you'd have to be actually pretty pessimistic about a change from what it's been doing to end up in a place where solar is not the biggest. And so it feels like it's almost inevitable that it happens. I mean, things can get in the way, there's barriers, and so those are important to address. But just in looking at it from a very macro simple way, it just keeps going. And so if it does keep going and solar is at the core of the energy system, rather than on the margins, you start to think about new uses of solar and new locations for solar and new ways to take advantage of it. And I think that to me has become the real interesting part about solar. It's not so much could we get solar manufacturing in our district and create a profitable business from it. Maybe there's possibilities to do that. It's more, can we take advantage of this different energy source that's clean, but it's also modular, and pair it with batteries and do something pretty clever. And so I think you're seeing a lot of creativity on that. And I think one endorsement of this being kind of an indication of the future, and also to show how cheap solar has gotten, a lot of the most innovative installations are happening in the global south, in developing economies where incomes are quite low, but grid reliability is also quite low. And so this combination of solar, batteries, and some IT lets you do a lot of interesting things. Like Pakistan is one that's emerged as like just massive solar producer and was really kind of sneakily eating away at the grid electricity because people were pulling panels from China and installing them, and all of a sudden you had much less demand, even as you're having increased air conditioning load. And so more of that to come, and you are seeing it in other places as well.
Yeah, the Pakistan story has been quite interesting to watch from the outside. Bridging your research and policy, one of the things that I feel like has been coming up more and more, particularly here in the States, is this question that business leaders, and I think many people that are inside the energy industry are having, is we've got the investment tax credits going away based on the new policy, and is that just going to kill solar? I mean, I was just on a call with some business leaders of a very large commercial real estate asset owner, and they said, "Oh, well, we've got to get some projects done between now and the 4th of July because this is just going to kill all potential projects." What are you seeing in the data and kind of that cost curve versus the tax credit component?
Yeah. I guess the one thing, I mean, I always try to speak from what we've seen in the evidence and from some historical evidence. And so one thing you see when you have tax credits end quickly is you have a rush to take advantage of the tax credits with safe harbor or just getting things built by the deadline. And then you see a lull after because you've pulled some projects forward, and then there's a little bit less incentive. But then it comes back after. And that's what we saw with wind power. In the early 2000s, we had these tax credits for wind that kept expiring every 18 months, and then they'd take another 6 months for Congress to reauthorize them. And so you'd have these periods where you had little built, but then it comes back. And I think solar is even likely to be less volatile than that because you've got this cost have come down so much, and also this current environment with, for a variety of reasons, the price of gas and the price of electricity from gas and others has this kind of indication of long-term rise. And so solar projects get more and more attractive. And the other thing is batteries too. So, I guess if you think about it one way, you've got maybe 20-25% of tax credit that's going away, but that's just, a couple, 2 or 3 years of cost reductions that are happening. And so I expect disruption, but it doesn't end things. And I think the continued fall in cost of solar and batteries, but the batteries fueling solar, that's a new thing that really increases the value proposition of solar, as does the rise of fossil fuel and grid electricity. So it's a good chance that those drivers offset the one big beautiful bill effect.
We tend to agree, Greg, especially when you factor in the tax credits stick around for batteries and you've got 100% depreciation in year one. So there's still a lot of good commercial offerings. And I think something that really resonates with us is where you speak about actually the hardware is only 25% of these project costs today. It's becoming almost the nominal part of it. And the rest is all of this soft cost. And it's one of the reasons we actually started VECKTA was to compress that soft cost out of the system and make it way more efficient, way more simple, way more intuitive to go and invest. Based on your research, what are you seeing on that soft cost side? And do you want to just explain to the listeners what a soft cost is and why it makes up such a big portion of doing projects today?
Yeah, right. So one of what I've been mostly talking about is the cost of solar modules, like a solar panel, and those for a long time were the big cost because they were really expensive to produce. And as they've come down in cost, the rest of the system, so it's people on roofs, swinging hammers, connecting electrical, putting in the bracing if they're on the ground, setting up the stands and the systems for that, and then including things like marketing and customer acquisition as well. And over time, those costs have become the biggest component of costs. And so there has to be innovation on that for costs to come down as well. And there has been, and that's been something we've been tracking as well, is that we do see that this balance of system costs or these soft costs are also coming down, just not quite as quickly as the hardware cost. So as a result, most of the cost now is on the soft cost. One thing, so on one hand, things are improving on the soft cost side; they're coming down. But on the other hand, is to look at other places like Australia is the one that I look to in the book, and it's pretty dramatic how they have installed so much solar. I think it's about a third of the homes have solar on them now. And they have deals where you get a one-day installation. There's this automatic permitting and a lot of single-story homes. So that makes things easier and less expensive, and some less heterogeneity in the types of roofs that are around. But this is also a fossil fuel intensive economy, and they've gone big on solar with a good solar resource, but not more than the US. And so I think we can learn from other places that also have similar labor costs to here and also are importing a lot of their panels, but yet find ways to install them really effectively and with lower costs. And so I think that's been something that I've been trying to learn more about. And I think there's more to learn as well as to how did somewhere like Australia end up at a third of the cost of the US on the installs.
I know you spent time at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and we actually quote often I believe it was the microgrid phase 2 study that highlighted that large portion of these projects, and in that depending on the project size and everything, they said between 30 and 70% are these soft costs. And it's interesting that same group that was saying, oh, is the industry going to die after the tax credits go away, I actually brought that up to them and showed them a graph of like you can make up a lot of the losses by the tax credits going away just by compressing soft costs, and you hit on marketing and customer acquisition and just kind of EPC and developer margin by bringing some of that down, and rather than them eating up the tax credits or the value of the tax credits for the buyer, they're just having to bring some of their margins down, and that's going to make up for it, right? Along with the hardware costs coming down.
Absolutely. And I had a PhD student, this was a while ago, studying how competitive solar installers are. And that was one of the observations he had, is that there's a lot of solar installers, but they tend not to compete with each other that much. And so I think exactly what you're saying, there is room for people to have sustainable businesses, but maybe have the margins be not like they are right now as well.
I'd love to connect with that student, because that's a cornerstone of our business, is driving competition amongst the suppliers in the space.
Yeah, right. Absolutely.
For exactly that. That's awesome. Well, so what's the strongest business case you've seen for a commercial company to become an energy prosumer? And maybe it's worth us kind of defining for the listeners the consumer versus prosumer, but optimizing their interaction with the grid. Yeah.
So historically, from the 1930s and I guess earlier, people that used electricity were consumers of electricity, and they're still thought of that by utilities and others. And they might be a residential consumer, but also a commercial or industrial consumer as well. And there's this notion that you could have, because of things like solar and being able to generate your own electricity, you could become a producer and a consumer. And so this idea of solar or energy prosumers has emerged. And one thing I've been working on in a different project with some colleagues is looking at these clusters of innovation. And if you look at the prosumer cluster, there's a lot of different innovations that come together here that are creating an opportunity. So there's the generation side, which you could say is mostly from solar, but could be on-site geothermal or small wind or something like that. But you could just focus on the solar part. There's something about storage, and that could be a dedicated battery system, but it easily could just be a vehicle or a fleet where you have some storage of electricity. And one big thing to observe is that there's a lot more storage in a vehicle than there is in the type of battery anyone would do in like a residential or probably even a commercial facility. And so being able to do bidirectional charging with vehicles starts to make it much easier to be a prosumer. And then the other ingredient is the digitalization and the IT part of it. So having systems that are interconnected, having information flowing around the system, energy management systems. That's a way to manage how you use energy and when you use energy. And so putting those things together, you start to have a stronger case for, wow, electric rates keep going up. And they're also volatile, at least for, say, gas prices, for example. Is there a way to make my energy system more predictable and maybe also lower the cost? And I think this constellation of producing your own energy with solar, storing it in a battery or a vehicle, and then having IT in the system to make it all work together is looking pretty attractive. And then you can even think of stronger versions where you have these systems linked together, potentially in a microgrid, and maybe beyond the regulatory system we have right now, but have some peer-to-peer energy trading. Because why not? We trade our rooms and we trade our vehicles on Airbnb and on Uber, and so why can't we trade electricity? And one of the reasons is electrical monopolies and the system that's been in place for 100 years. But at some point, if you continue to have rising rates and these alternative technologies that look attractive, I think you start to see some defection from the system and start to have people being clever about how they find that it might even be better not to work on your own doing that, but link up with neighbors or adjacent businesses or something like that. And so I think our current moment could really kind of supercharge this kind of idea of the energy prosumer, because the deal you're getting from just being a consumer is looking like a worse and worse deal, not an attractive deal. And these alternatives start to get really interesting.
Yeah. And Greg, are you seeing the utilities starting to lean into this a bit more? Because obviously they're under a lot of stress right now, trying to deal with the data center load requests and more electrification. And they were kind of anti us generating our own energy in the past, but now it seems like they're kind of desperate for any capacity. Are you seeing that shift?
I mean, I've seen it in some small areas. Like, I think I've often looked at places like smaller ones, like Green Mountain Power, where they're subsidizing people to put batteries in their homes so they don't have to build new generation. And that was really started before the data center big push. And so I think some of those models are interesting and spread to other places. But there's also some conservatism in the system, sometimes for good reason, partly because they've got a pretty good deal with a monopoly regulation, and also because they're in charge of providing critical infrastructure where reliability is essential. And so they do have a really important job that has to do with public safety. And so there's reasons for them not to be as innovative as maybe the opportunities that exist would suggest. Yeah.
I love you speaking to the vehicle battery component, because I don't think people realize that. I'm driving the Lightning, and that's like 150 kilowatt battery, and that's like 10x more than what most homes would ever consider. And that's a massive opportunity, isn't it, that we've got these mobile batteries on wheels that can dispatch a lot of power when they need to. Yeah,
and I think this, we now have options where there is bidirectional charging available, and like discharging the vehicle battery for home use. That starts to look really interesting. Yeah, but big batteries in vehicles compared to what you do in a basement.
We receive a lot of questions from business leaders around the world wanting to learn more about the energy transition, what is possible, and where to start. So to help you stay informed and up to date on best practices, opportunities, risks, and success stories, we created an industry newsfeed at VECKTA.com/news with all our podcasts, blogs, and newsletter. Check it out and connect with Dan, myself, and the VECKTA team to learn more. Cheers and have a good one.